The Unexpected Guardian, Bilbo's adoption of Frodo and their adventures in Baggins. Chapter 1. A Dire Inheritance. The sun cast its golden rays upon the verdant hills of Hobbiton, painting the landscape in hues of amber and emerald. Baggins, nestled snugly into the hillside, stood as a bastion of tranquility amidst the bustling Shire. Within its circular doorway, Bilbo Baggins savored his morning tea, blissfully unaware of the impending upheaval that would soon shatter his idyllic existence.
Ah, what a splendid day for a bit of writing. Perhaps I'll finally finish that chapter on elvish poetry.
A sharp rap at the door pierced the stillness, its urgency palpable even through the thick wood. Bilbo's brow furrowed as he set down his teacup, the porcelain clinking softly against its saucer.
Now who could that be at this hour? Certainly not any respectable hobbit.
As he swung open the round door, Bilbo's eyes widened in shock. Before him stood a draggled young hobbit, his clothes muddied and torn, eyes red, rimmed from weeping. This was Frodo Baggins, though Bilbo scarcely recognized his young cousin in such a state.
Uncle Bilbo, they're gone. Mom and Dad, the river? Shh.
The lad's voice cracked, unable to finish the sentence. Comprehension dawned on Bilbo's face, horror and grief etching deep lines around his eyes.
Bide of Allah, come in, my boy. Come in at once.
Bilbo ushered Frodo inside, his arm protectively encircling the young hobbit's shoulders. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, sealing out the cheerful day that now seemed a cruel mockery of their sorrow.
I didn't know where else to go. The Brandybucks. They tried, but I couldn't stay there. Not with the river so close.
Bilbo's heart clenched at the raw pain in Frodo's voice. He guided the lad to a plush armchair, kneeling before him to look into those haunted blue eyes.
You did right to come here, Frodo. Baggins shall be your home for as long as you need. Now, let's get you cleaned up and fed. We'll face this together, my boy. Why now?
As Bilbo bustled about, heating water for a bath and preparing a hearty meal, Frodo sat motionless, staring unseeing at the crackling fire. The older hobbit's movements were purposeful, each task a bulwark against the tide of grief threatening to overwhelm them both.
There now, a nice hot bath will do you a world of good, and I've some of my old clothes that should fit you well enough until we can see about getting you properly outfitted.
Frodo nodded mutely, allowing himself to be led to the bathroom. The steam rose in lazy curls, carrying the soothing scent of lavender. As Bilbo closed the door to give the lad privacy, he leaned against the wall, his composure finally cracking.
Oh, Belladonna, what am I to do? I'm no father. How can I possibly?
He trailed off, shaking his head firmly. Now was not the time for self-doubt. Frodo needed him, and by the Shire, he would not let the lad down. With renewed determination, Bilbo strode to the kitchen to prepare a feast fit for a grieving heart.
Uncle Bilbo, I'm finished.
The quiet voice startled Bilbo from his culinary efforts. He turned to find Frodo standing in the doorway, swimming in one of Bilbo's old shirts, his damp curls plastered to his forehead.
Sit down and tuck in. Nothing like a full belly to fortify the spirit.
As they ate in companionable silence, the first tendrils of understanding began to grow between them. Bilbo watched Frodo carefully, noting how the lad's eyes would occasionally dart to the windows, as if expecting some new calamity to befall them.
Frodo, my lad, I want you to know that you're safe here. Baggins may not be much, but it's a sturdy home, and you'll always have a place within its walls.
Thank you, Uncle. I don't know what I would have done if...
The young hobbit's voice caught, tears welling up once more. Bilbo reached across the table, clasping Frodo's hand in his own.
There, no need to say more. We're family, Frodo. We'll weather this storm together.
As night fell, Bilbo showed Frodo to one of Baggins' many spare rooms. The older hobbit had spent the afternoon airing out linens and dusting furniture, transforming the long unused space into a cozy sanctuary.
I hope you'll be comfortable here. If you need anything at all, day or night, don't hesitate to wake me.
Uncle Bilbo, would you mind staying just until I fall asleep?
The vulnerability in Frodo's voice tugged at Bilbo's heartstrings. Without a word, he settled into the armchair beside the bed, reaching out to pat Frodo's hand reassuringly.
Of course, my boy. I'll be right here.
As Frodo's breathing eventually evened out into the deep rhythms of sleep, Bilbo found himself studying the young hobbit's face. In repose, the lines of grief softened, revealing the innocent child beneath. A fierce protectiveness welled up within Bilbo's chest, surprising in its intensity.
I may not know much about being a guardian, Frodo, but I swear by all that's good in this world, I'll do right by you.
Little did Bilbo know that his vow would soon be put to the test. As dawn broke the following day, a commotion in the streets of Hobbiton roused both hobbits from their slumber. Bilbo rushed to the window, his eyes widening at the sight that greeted him.
Great Errol. Frodo, stay inside.
A band of rough-looking men, their clothes tattered and their eyes wild with desperation, were pouring into Hobbiton. The Dunlending outlaws, driven by famine in their own lands, had come to pillage the bountiful Shire.
Uncle Bilbo, what's happening?
Bilbo's hand strayed to his pocket where the weight of his magic ring rested. For a moment, he considered using it to hide, to keep Frodo safe. But the cries of his fellow hobbits steeled his resolve.
We're under attack, my lad, but we won't cower in the dark. The Shire needs us.
With trembling hands, Bilbo retrieved Sting from its place of honor above the mantelpiece. The elvish blade gleamed in the early morning light, its edge as keen as the day it was forged.
Frodo, do you know how to use a sling?
Yes, Uncle, Dad taught me. Before?
Grief and determination warred in the young hobbit's eyes. Bilbo nodded, handing him a sturdy leather sling and a pouch of smooth stones.
Then let's show these ruffians what the folk of the Shire are made of.
They burst out of Bag End, Bilbo brandishing Sting with a ferocity that belied his small stature. All around them, chaos reigned. Hobbits fled before the advancing Dunlendings, their cries of terror piercing the air.
To arms, hobbits of the Shire, defend your homes.
His rallying cry cut through the panic, igniting a spark of courage in his fellow hobbits. Farmer Maggot and his sons formed a defensive line with their pitchforks, while the Gamgees wielded garden tools with grim determination.
Uncle, look out!
A burly Dunlending charged at Bilbo, his rusted sword raised high. With a grace born of his adventures, Bilbo ducked under the wild swing, Sting flashing in the sunlight as it found its mark. The outlaws fell with a cry, clutching his wounded leg.
Well struck, Frodo.
The young hobbit had felled another attacker with a well-aimed stone, his face a mask of concentration. Grief had honed Frodo's aim to deadly accuracy, each stone finding its target with uncanny precision. The battle raged through Hobbiton's lanes and gardens, transforming the bucolic landscape into a chaotic battlefield. Hobbits wielded everything from ancient family heirlooms to common kitchenware against the marauders' steel.
Fall back to the party tree. We'll make our stand there.
The hobbits retreated in good order, forming a defensive circle around the ancient oak. Bilbo stood at its base, Sting glowing faintly blue in his hand, a beacon of hope for the beleaguered Shirefolk.
They're coming again, Uncle.
Another wave of Dunlendings charged forward, their faces gaunt with hunger and desperation. Bilbo's heart ached at the tragedy of it all, but he steeled himself for the fight.
Stand firm, my friends. Firm.
The clash of steel on steel filled the air as hobbit and outlaw met in furious combat. Bilbo whirled through the fray, Sting singing its deadly song. Frodo's sling never ceased its lethal rhythm, each stone finding its mark with devastating effect. As the sun began to set, painting the battlefield in hues of crimson and gold, the tide of battle finally turned. The remaining Dunlendings, faced with the unexpected ferocity of hobbit resistance, began to falter.
Push them back. Drive them from our lands.
With a final desperate charge, the hobbits surged forward. The Dunlendings broke, fleeing into the gathering darkness, leaving behind their wounded and dead. In the aftermath of battle, Bilbo surveyed the changed landscape of Hobbiton. Gardens lay trampled, fences splintered, and the once peaceful lanes were stained with blood. But amidst the destruction, he saw something else. The unbreakable spirit of the Shire, forged anew in the crucible of conflict.
Frodo, lad, are you all right?
The young hobbit nodded, his face streaked with dirt and tears. In that moment, Bilbo saw not just an orphan child, but a warrior born.
We did it, Uncle. We saved the Shire.
That we did, my boy. That we did.
As the hobbits began the task of tending their wounded and rebuilding their homes, Bilbo made a decision that would change both their lives forever.
Frodo Baggins, if you're amenable, I'd like to make it official. Will you consent to be my heir and ward?
Frodo's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope shining through the grief that had clouded them for so long.
Do you mean it, Uncle Bilbo? Truly?
With all my heart. that, dear boy.
Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The verdant hills of the Shire unfurled their emerald banners, heralding the arrival of spring. Yet, the season's customary joy eluded Bag End, its round windows shuttered against an unseen menace. Within, Bilbo Baggins paced the circular hallway, his weathered face etched with concern.
Frodo, my lad, I fear our peaceful days have come to an end.
What troubles you, Uncle? Surely the winter's trials are behind us now.
Bilbo's hand strayed to his waistcoat pocket, an unconscious gesture that did not escape Frodo's notice.
If only it was so simple. I've spotted unfamiliar faces lurking in the shadows, eyes that gleam with malice rather than mirth. They're not here for our renowned hospitality, I'm afraid.
Strangers? In Hobbiton? What could they possibly want?
A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant chirping of birds, oblivious to the growing tension within Bag End.
There are things in this world, Frodo, treasures beyond imagining, and there are those who would stop at nothing to possess them.
Frodo's brow furrowed, his mind racing to decipher his uncle's cryptic words.
You speak of your adventures, Uncle? Of dragon hordes and elven rings?
Bilbo's eyes darted to the window, scanning the seemingly peaceful garden beyond.
Adventures have a way of following one home, my boy, and I fear mine has caught up with us at last.
A sudden knock at the door sent both hobbits jumping. Bilbo's hand flew to Sting's hilt, the elvish blade glinting in the firelight.
Quick, Frodo, to the secret pantry.
With practiced stealth, they slipped into a hidden chamber behind the larder. Frodo's heart thundered in his chest as the pounding on the door grew more insistent.
Uncle, who are they? What do they want?
Mercenaries, I'd wager, hired by someone who knows far too much about my souvenir from the Misty Mountains.
The door splintered, and heavy footfalls echoed through Bag End. Gruff voices filled the air, their words muffled, but their intent clear.
Search every nook and cranny. The halflings can't have gone far.
Bilbo's grip on Sting tightened, his knuckles white against the hilt.
We can't stay here, Frodo. We must flee, and quickly.
But where can we go? The Shire isn't safe anymore.
A grim determination settled over Bilbo's features, aging him beyond his years.
There's only one place they won't dare follow. We make for the old forest.
Frodo's eyes widened in fear, tales of the forest's malevolence flooding his mind.
The old forest? But Uncle, the trees, they're alive and malicious.
Are a danger we know, lad. Better the devil you know than the one breaking down our door.
With a nod of understanding, Frodo steeled himself for the perilous journey ahead. As the mercenaries' search grew closer, Bilbo and Frodo slipped out through a secret tunnel, leaving behind the comfort of Bag End for the unknown dangers that lurk beyond the borders of the Shire. The night air bit at their skin as they emerged from the tunnel, the stars above offering little comfort. Bilbo led the way, his steps sure despite the darkness. They skirted the edges of fields, ducking behind hedgerows at the slightest sound.
Uncle, I hear horses. They're coming.
Bilbo's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. In the distance, torchlight flickered, drawing ever closer.
Run, Frodo, to the forest.
They sprinted across open ground, their hearts pounding in their ears. The tree line loomed before them, a wall of darkness more foreboding than their pursuers.
The trees, Uncle. They're moving.
Indeed, the ancient oaks and elms seemed to shift and sway, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Bilbo brandished Sting, its blue glow casting eerie shadows.
Stay close, lad, and whatever you do, don't touch the trees.
They pressed on, Bilbo hacking at encroaching vines and branches with Sting. The forest fought back, roots rising to trip them, branches swinging down to bar their path. Frodo fumbled in his pack, producing a small tinderbox.
Fire! The trees fear fire.
With trembling hands, Frodo lit a branch. The nearest trees recoiled, creating a small clearing around them, but their respite was short-lived. A horn sounded in the distance. Their pursuers had entered the forest.
We can't stop. The Barrow Downs are ahead. We might find shelter there.
They pressed on through the night, the forest's hostility growing with each step. By dawn, they emerged onto rolling hills shrouded in mist. The Barrow Downs stretched before them, ancient burial mounds looming like silent sentinels.
I don't like this place, Uncle. It feels wrong.
Bilbo's face was grim, his eyes darting from mound to mound.
There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world.
A chill wind swept across the downs, carrying with it a sound that froze the blood in their veins, the clanking of ancient armor and the whisper of long-dead voices.
Uncle, help!
Before Bilbo could react, a spectral hand burst from the ground, grasping Frodo's ankle. The young hobbit was dragged into an open barrow, his scream cut short as the mound sealed behind him.
Frodo, no, no!
Bilbo charged at the barrow, sting flashing in the pale light, but his blade passed harmlessly through the spirits that now surrounded him. Ghostly warriors, clad in ancient armor, advanced with rusted swords raised.
Back, you devils! Back to the shadows!
His words had no effect. The spirits pressed closer, their hollow eyes fixed on the ring in Bilbo's pocket. In desperation, Bilbo reached for it, his fingers closing around the cold metal. The world shifted, colors fading to shades of gray. The spirits became more solid, their forms wavering between flesh and shadow. Bilbo could see Frodo now, lying pale and still within the barrow.
Hold on, my boy, hold on.
Drawing on half-remembered lore, Bilbo began to chant in a language he barely understood. The words felt heavy on his tongue, each syllable a battle against the Barrow-Wight's power.
Luthien Tinuvil, fairest of the fair, by starlight and sunlight, I call you from despair.
The air shimmered, and for a moment Bilbo thought he saw a figure of surpassing beauty standing before him. The spirits recoiled, their forms dissipating like smoke in the wind. The barrow cracked open, and Frodo gasped, color flooding back into his cheeks.
Uncle, what happened?
Bilbo rushed to Frodo's side, helping him to his feet. But their ordeal was far from over. As they emerged from the barrow, they found themselves surrounded by a ring of steel. Their mortal pursuers had caught up.
Well, well, the famous Bilbo Baggins. Hand over the ring, and we might let you live.
Bilbo's hand tightened around the ring in his pocket. He could feel its power thrumming through him, whispering promises of victory.
Frodo, when I say run, you run, and don't look back.
But Uncle, I can't leave you here alone.
Promise me.
Frodo nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. Bilbo took a deep breath, then slipped on the ring. The world shifted once more, and he vanished from sight.
What sorcery is this? Find him.
Chaos erupted as Bilbo moved unseen among the mercenaries, sting, cutting purse strings and hamstringing horses. Frodo seized the moment, darting between the confused men and fleeing into the mist. For hours, Bilbo led the mercenaries on a wild chase through the downs, using every trick he had learned in his long life. By nightfall, the band of hired swords was scattered and broken, lost in the treacherous landscape. Exhausted and wounded, Bilbo finally removed the ring. He found Frodo waiting for him at the edge of the downs, worry etched on his young face.
Uncle, I feared you had fallen to those brigands.
Bilbo embraced his nephew, his body trembling from more than just fatigue.
It's all right, my boy. We're safe now, but we can't go home. Not yet. There are greater perils ahead. I fear this is only the beginning.
Chapter 3, The Journey Home, where, moi, by. The verdant hills of the Shire loomed before Bilbo and Frodo as they crested the final ridge of their long journey home. The familiar landscape, once a patchwork of peaceful gardens and cozy smiles, now bore the unmistakable scars of conflict. Smoke curled from chimneys in irregular patterns, and the usual bustle of hobbit life was conspicuously absent.
Uncle, something's amiss. The air feels wrong.
Indeed, my lad. Keep your wits about you. We may find more than a cold hearth awaiting us at Bag End.
As they descended into Hobbiton proper, the true extent of the changes became apparent. Gardens lay trampled, fences splintered, and an eerie silence hung over the town like a shroud. A group of hobbits huddled near the Green Dragon, their faces etched with worry and fear. At the sight of Bilbo and Frodo, their expressions transformed into a mixture of relief and desperation.
Mr. Bilbo, young Master Frodo, praise be, you've returned.
The old hobbit's voice quavered with emotion as he rushed forward, his withered hands clasping Bilbo's arm.
Gaffer, what in the name of all that's good has happened here?
The gaffer's eyes darted nervously, scanning the area before he leaned in close.
It's them Sackville Bagginses, sir. They taken over, they have. Claimed you was dead and gone, and that Bag End and all its treasures were rightfully dead.
That's preposterous. We've only been gone a few months.
A bitter laugh escaped the gaffer's lips, a sound so unlike his usual jovial demeanor that it sent a chill down Frodo's spine.
Aye, but it was enough. They brought in outsiders, big folk with swords and mean looks. Anyone who spoke against them, well, it didn't end well.
Bilbo's hand unconsciously moved to the hilt of Sting, his fingers tightening around the familiar grip.
And what of the other hobbits? Surely they didn't stand for this tyranny?
The gaffer's eyes lit up with a fierce pride, a spark of the old hobbit spirit shining through.
Oh, we've not taken it lying down, Mr. Bilbo. There's a resistance of sorts. Meeting in secret, planning, but we've needed a leader, someone to rally behind.
His gaze fixed on Bilbo, hope radiating from every line of his careworn face.
Uncle, we can't abandon them. This is our home, our people, our people.
Bilbo's expression hardened, a determination settling over his features that Frodo had only seen in the direst of circumstances during their recent adventures.
No, my boy, we certainly cannot. It seems our journey isn't over just yet. Gaffer, gather those you trust. It's time we reminded the Sackville Bagginses and their thugs what it truly means to tangle with a Baggins.
As the gaffer scurried off, a newfound energy in his step, Bilbo turned to Frodo. The younger hobbit's face was a mixture of excitement and apprehension.
Are you ready for this, Frodo? It won't be easy, and it certainly won't be safe.
I'm with you, Uncle, to whatever end.
With a nod of understanding between them, uncle and nephew set off towards the heart of Hobbiton. Their arrival marked the first spark of what would soon become a blazing rebellion against the usurpers of the Shire. In the days that followed, Bilbo and Frodo worked tirelessly to organize the resistance. The Green Dragon became their clandestine headquarters, its cellar transformed into a war room where plans were hatched and strategies debated. Hobbits from all corners of the Shire trickled in, drawn by whispered rumors of the Baggins' return.
Bilbo, we've got word from Tuckborough. The Tucks are with us, but they're under close watch.
Then we'll have to be their cover. Frodo, what news from Buckland?
The brandy bucks are ready, Uncle. They've been stockpiling weapons, farm tools mostly, but they'll serve.
Bilbo pored over a crude map of the Shire, his finger tracing potential routes of attack and retreat.
We'll need to strike simultaneously across the Shire. Divide their forces, keep them off balance. Frodo, you'll lead the assault from the east. I'll take the west.
The younger hobbits exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and trepidation in their eyes.
Begging your pardon, Mr. Bilbo, but what about them big folk? They've got real swords and armor. We've naught but pitchforks and courage.
Bilbo's eyes twinkled with a mischievous light, reminiscent of his younger adventuring days.
Ah, but that's where you're wrong, my dear Sam. We have something far more powerful than steel and iron. We have the element of surprise, and more importantly, we have the lay of the land.
Every hill, every burrow, every hidden path, they're all unknown to these invaders, but they're as familiar to us as the backs of our hands. Over the next weeks, the Shire transformed. Peaceful farmers became guerrilla fighters, learning the art of ambush and sabotage. Gardens were repurposed into training grounds, and ancient family heirlooms were unearthed to serve as weapons. The once tranquil landscape buzzed with covert activity, a powder keg waiting to ignite. As the day of reckoning approached, tension hung thick in the air. Bilbo gathered the leaders of the resistance for one final council.
Remember, our goal is to reclaim Bag End. Once we control the hill, we control Hobbiton. The Sackville Bagginses will have nowhere to retreat.
And what of Lotho, Uncle? He'll not give up easily.
A shadow passed over Bilbo's face, his expression grim.
Leave Lotho to me. I have a score to settle with that conniving upstart.
As night fell, the rebellion sprang into action. From the east, Frodo led a charge of brandybucks and tooks, their battle cries shattering the peace of the Shire. To the west, Bilbo's forces emerged from hidden burrows and thickets, catching the hired thugs completely off guard. The battle raged through Hobbiton's lanes and gardens. Hobbits wielded everything from ancient swords to garden shears with deadly efficiency. The invaders, caught between the hammer of Frodo's assault and the anvil of Bilbo's cunning traps, began to falter.
Ushan, follow the Shire.
His voice rang out clear and strong, inspiring those around him to fight with renewed vigor. Frodo's sling sang through the air, felling foes with uncanny accuracy. Meanwhile, Bilbo led a small, elite team towards Bag End. The once welcoming smile had been transformed into a fortress, its round windows now arrow slits, its green door barred and reinforced.
Sam, Merry, take your teams and flank them. Pippin, you're with me. We're going in through the old secret passage.
As diversionary attacks drew the defenders' attention, Bilbo and Pippin slipped into a hidden tunnel that led directly into the heart of Bag End. They emerged in the study, now a mockery of its former self, strewn with maps and half-empty wine bottles.
Well, well, if it isn't my dear cousin Bilbo, come to reclaim your precious hole in the ground.
Lotho's sneer was cut short as Bilbo's blade flashed in the dim light. The two hobbits circled each other, years of family rivalry culminating in this moment.
You've gone too far this time, Lotho. It ends here.
Their duel was fierce and swift, blades clashing in the confined space of the study. Lotho's youth and strength were matched by Bilbo's experience and cunning. Just as it seemed Lotho might gain the upper hand, Bilbo's fingers brushed against something in his pocket, the ring. For a moment he was tempted to use it to vanish and strike from the shadows. But with a supreme effort of will, Bilbo resisted. He would win this fight as himself, not relying on any magical trinket. With a clever feint and a lightning-fast riposte, Bilbo disarmed Lotho, sending his sword clattering to the floor.
Yield, Lotho. It's over.
As dawn broke, Bilbo and Frodo stood atop the hill of Bag End, surveying the changed landscape of their beloved Shire. The invaders had been routed, the Sackville Bagginses and their cohorts imprisoned to await justice. But the cost had been high. Smoke rose from several smiles, and the once pristine gardens were churned and bloody.
We won, Uncle, but at what price?
Bilbo's hand strayed to his pocket, fingers brushing against the cool metal of the ring. A shadow passed over his face, gone almost before Frodo could notice it.
Victory always comes at a cost, my boy. But this is only the beginning. I fear there are greater perils ahead, beyond the borders of our little Shire.
As they stood there, bloodied but unbowed, both hobbits knew in their hearts that their adventures were far from over. The innocence of the Shire had been shattered, and the echoes of this conflict would ripple out into the wider world, drawing them inexorably towards a destiny neither could yet foresee.